As Rodney said, and I really want to thank you for the wonderful introduction, one of the questions I frequently get asked is, are you a librarian? And I always enjoy that question because what I always say is, no, I'm actually a former Chippendale, but they wanted somebody who looked good in a suit. As you've heard from the lovely introduction, I have had a number of experiences in the course of my career. I actually started out as a child librarian. I graduated from library school when I was 21, and I was already working in a library for 6 months as a librarian prior to that. So that's the only way that I could have acquired all of those wonderful experiences and still look as youthful as I currently do. Before I came to ALA, I was the director of the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners. And I'm going to use some stories from time to time about some of my experiences there. The Board of Library Commissioners is a very interesting entity. It's one of the few commissions in the country. I think there are only 6. We reported directly to the governor. My board members were gubernatorial appointments. We were very heavily immersed in politics. I was up at the State House almost every day working with various committees. And I had an opportunity to get plunged into this whole world of politics and advocacy. We developed a strategic plan when I was in Massachusetts. We went out, we got funding for the plan, and managed to, over time, double funding for libraries in Massachusetts. My estimate is that we brought in an additional $1,000 an hour in funding for libraries during the 10 years that I served there. In addition to that, we also were able to begin getting state construction funds for libraries, and we're able to rebuild 250 of the 350 public libraries in Massachusetts. So I think that I'm going to talk a lot about some of my experiences in working with local advocates. A little bit of information about you would be helpful at this point. I know that the first timers stood. How many of you, and just show your hands, are from public libraries? Okay, how about academic libraries? Okay, special libraries. And you can raise your hand more than once. I know there's at least one person who will do that. Any school librarians here? Okay, any former school librarians? All right, okay. Trustees? Friends of libraries? Good for you. Is there anybody here who thinks they're at the pest control conference? That has actually happened to me. That's a different story that I'm not going to tell. I will have to tell one story, though, that I heard only last night. We were talking about how stressful it is to be a speaker, and how even more stressful it is to be someone responsible for a speaker actually showing up. And somebody described the story of a group of people waiting for them, and in fact, the process by which they managed to lock themselves in their basement and spent an hour trying to break out of their basement, which included taking a sledgehammer and swinging it at the basement door as hard as they could, and expecting that it would shatter, and discovering, in fact, that the sledgehammer bounced back. So I'm very happy to report, and one of your tasks for this conference will be to find out who this person was, this mystery person. I'm going to begin by talking a little bit about the future of libraries. As you've probably already guessed, I will not be showing a PowerPoint. There will be no discussion of new and cool technologies, and I will not once use the term paradigm shifts. Usually that gets a round of applause. The advantage of speaking of the future is obvious. Anytime you predict things that will happen in, let's say, 10 years, people will have pretty much forgotten what you said 10 years ago. It works even better in the long term. I'm much more comfortable making predictions about libraries 100 years from now, secure in the knowledge that the audience and me won't be around, and the audience will not in any way be able to criticize me for any errors in my predictions. There are some less obvious dangers of talking about the future, however. First, the future can make you look silly. There's nothing more entertaining than looking back through library literature and finding places where Melville Dewey is quoted as saying that one day we will be delivering books by dirigible. History does have a way of showing us how silly our assumptions can be, and that's going to be one of my themes. I think the second danger is much more insidious, however. We're often told that we must anticipate trends, that we have to be proactive rather than reactive. The problem and the danger here is that in our attempts to anticipate the future, we can accidentally create it. For example, if we decide that in the future there will not be enough money for libraries, then the logical response as librarians is to shut them down in an orderly fashion. The reality is everyone loves a myth, but we need to be very careful about the myths we create. This, of course, brings us to my theme today. And the reality, of course, is that the future does not create us, but rather we create the future. There are many possible scenarios ahead for libraries, for the library profession, for our society, and many possible choices. But my point today is that we're the ones who are going to make those choices. I'm going to talk about this future as what I see in terms of what I see as a series of challenges and choices that we face today that will shape the next generation of libraries that we will be creating. I'll begin with everyone's favorite, and that is, of course, technology. I'm not going to dwell on technology because there will be plenty of other programs at this conference talking about the ways in which technology is going to change libraries. But the question ultimately is, how will the internet and new information and communication technologies impact our libraries? I think the answer is pretty straightforward. Library 2.0 is here. We might as well embrace it. In fact, as far as I now have heard in certain places that Library 2.0 has now already become passé. Welcome to your new collections. Not only do you still have to contend with books, magazines, video, music, you now have ebooks, zines, databases, feeds, websites, YouTube videos, audio files, blogs, wikis. Anyone blogging this session? Okay. Anyone on Twitter at the moment? All right. Say nice things about me, please. This is your collection, and these are the new challenges we face in terms of preservation and access. Welcome to your new services, in person, via telephone, blogs, email, feeds, text messaging, Facebook, library websites, Flickr, MySpace, and Twitter are all things that we're now going to have to deal with as methods by which we serve patrons both within the library and within the community and sometimes around the world. I've been known to occasionally call reference in Australia when my local library was closed, usually when I was at a bar having an argument with somebody. The reality is that things like gaming, things like virtual reality are rapidly becoming worlds in which we're going to have to operate. The big push, as you'll be seeing probably at this conference, certainly by midwinter and annual, is the whole notion of delivering the library via handheld device. That's clearly where we're heading at this point.